So let's talk to, is it Stefan or Steven? I want to make sure I pronounce your name right, from Iowa. And it sounds like you want to talk about the importance of faith. Stefan? Okay, awesome. Stefan, you are live on Talk Heathen. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I just wanted to talk about how faith is important in the regards of like our identity, right? As individuals. I think that if God exists and he's real and he's infinite, that if we were created in his image, that we have value, right? So if it starts there.
If we accept all those conclusions, sure.
Right. And as far as the evidence is concerned, that's just different people's perspective on what they see and how they grow in life and what they, like what I see right now is nature, and I see things, I see beauty, right? And so certain things I don't think fall into the evolutionary narrative as far as like forgiveness, for instance. I don't really understand on a social construct how the evolutionary process can explain things like forgiveness, right?
Ooh, I can really jump into that. There's a lot to be said there, but I want to not just tear apart all of your individual premises, because you've already laid out 4 or 5 things that I might disagree with. What is sort of the central pillar of your call, though? Because rather than getting distracted by each plank, what is your kind of basic conclusion that because forgiveness exists,
like,
because
I'm talking
are
like
beautiful,
worldview.
there must be a God?
Yeah, if my worldview starts with God, then I believe myself to have value, and faith will then become important. And learning how to trust something greater than myself, which is part of faith, is also important. Because if I believe that I was, and I'm not trying to be like, say this the wrong way, but if I'm an overgrown, evolved bacteria, I don't think there's any real justification for doing anything right or wrong. It would really be kind of pointless, and there wouldn't be much purpose to life, right?
Well, I kind of wanted to jump in, and I feel like there's a false dichotomy happening here within kind of your initial argument of saying that basically, like, we can have forgiveness, we can have faith in these things, like, or the alternative is like believing in evolution. And it's like, these are not really dichotomous, and there's nothing related to evolution within our talk about faith and forgiveness. Like, none of that has anything to do with evolution. Like, can I kind of understand a little bit what your understanding of evolution is?
Yeah, I'll do my best to explain it. Like, I do understand, and I do believe in evolution, by the way. I do believe in it. Because, if I believe that God is beyond, time, so it's really a process that doesn't matter to God, but it was a process that we were involved in. But I believe that, so I've heard lots of different, like Richard Dawkins and things like that, try to explain how the reason we have love and all these things is so that we can reproduce, and that, evolution is a selfish process that involves survival, right? And so the only reason we care for each other is for the betterment of our survival and our reproduction. And
so I think
that's flawed, because
that's only true in aggregate, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I think our framing is a little bit problematic, because like, I primarily want to push back on the idea that there's an intention to evolution, or that there's an intention to love and an intention to these other processes, because I think that adds some bias to the equation of saying that, like, there is some reason for anything. I don't think that there's any reason to anything, especially when talking about evolution.
Sure.
It's a process, and there are results, and there are certain things that are selected for. But when we say selected for, that's even a bit weird of language, because that kind of implies that there's some agency or intent. I don't know exactly what the best wording would be to describe it, but like, it ends up being kind of cause and effect might be a better way to word it, where it's not that love directly like was intended to have organisms like reproduce, but the ones that ended up reproducing are the ones that are more likely to have their species survive. So therefore, we're going to see more of that species propagate in the future. So it's not that like this was a desired trait. It just happened to be what led to the propagation of the species. So could there be...
What I'm talking about is on a social perspective, like how we interact with each other and certain emotions that come from that kind of transcend evolution. And one of them would be forgiveness, right? And so, you know, even like a soldier jumping in front of somebody and doesn't even know them and dying, you know, sacrifice and things like that, which don't really account for that particular narrative that, you know,
but they
evolved,
do,
and the reason we have these processes and things like that.
Yeah, that's why I said it only makes sense in aggregate. Like, yes, if I were right now to go and jump in front of a speeding car in order to protect a bunch of orphans, that doesn't do anything to further my bloodline. So when we look at like one specific individual case in that sense, it causes something of a problem. But if we zoom out and think about it in aggregate, think about it with any sort of like larger millions of years evolutionary type perspective, we recognize that, oh, okay, a species that has an element where they're willing to jump in front of a car or push orphans out of the way is a species that is less likely to be, you know, devoured by leopards and hyenas and everything else. We have to recognize that these things happen in a piecemeal fashion. And in the same way that we have these sort of like crude and now almost sort of quaint and cheesy evolutionary charts where you see, you know, a chimp slowly begin to walk upright and eventually you get to some picture of a caveman. We can see those same sorts of things when we talk about a lot of different human emotions. Obviously, when we're talking about emotions and we're trying to analyze the behavior of animals who we can't actually speak to and get a proper understanding of their consciousness, we want to be really mindful about the way we anthropomorphize and the way that we project these things. But you can see, quote unquote, forgiveness in baboon troops, in elephant colonies, among orcas, among all kinds of big-brained and sophisticated animals. And you can see lower and lesser degrees of that as you go all the way down the evolutionary ladder. It makes sense that a sea turtle that lays 100 eggs
really come up with a good explanation for that, and I would say it would take a lot of faith to believe that, you know, all this is random, since all we've ever observed is order, really.
Well, Stephen,
it's not random. I'm not talking about things happen, and then some things happen to happen more often because they end up reproducing themselves.
Stefan, does a lack of an explanation make your belief system true?
No, I just think it puts us in the same boat. I think we both have to have faith in things that we don't really understand.
So then if we don't understand something, why? How does that... But even if you specifically don't understand something, why does that then call for a supernatural being to be present? Like, why then are we jumping to faith and instead of just saying, I don't know?
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from. I would say, as far as calling God supernatural, right, I really don't subscribe to that in a sense where I think God is necessary. I think he's not supernatural. He always was. He's a part of nature. He's also outside of nature, right? It's a concept of the creator of everything that we see, right, and know to be true. It's not whatever we can imagine God can do. Like, a lot of people think, well, why didn't God do this and God do that? Well, that's really not reality, right? What we see in reality is that there's a lot of things we don't understand, like the infinite universe that we observe, you know, the constants of the universe, which are actually pretty fine-tuned. If you actually talk to some scientists, if any one of those constants were changed or deducted in any way, life wouldn't exist.
That's not, right? I reject that.
Gravity.
I reject that argument, Stefan.
But just talk to some scientists, Ben.
Yeah.
Stefan, no, I have to really say it. Like, you sound incredibly incredulous. You're sitting here accusing me of not understanding the thing that I am trying very patiently to slowly and gently explain to you. I am not a biologist. I am not an expert in ethology. I'm not especially qualified to sit here and explain evolution to you, but I understand why a sea turtle that lays 100 eggs doesn't need to have the same emotional capacity for caring for their young as a chimpanzee who only has one baby maybe every 5 years. Like, it makes sense that we would end up working through these different systems, and we can see piecemeal how we can go from one system to another system and why one system might propagate more effectively than another one. To say that we don't understand that is just kind of lazy. You can't just wave your hand and say, well, it's all made up, and so I can make up whatever I want to make up, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I get where you're coming from. I'm just saying there's things we don't understand. I'm not saying that what you just explained to me, I don't understand. I'm saying that there's things beyond that that we still don't understand. And so,
yeah, and 100 years ago, we barely understood any of the evolutionary stuff I'm talking about. And 100 years before that, we had no notion of it. Yeah,
right. So then in the meantime,
we'll have a better understanding of abiogenesis and the founding of the universe and everything else. In the meantime, why are you insisting that my God isn't the God from the Bible or the God that has this power or that power? My God is just the thing that fills in all the stuff I don't understand. I mean, what does that even mean? If I don't understand it, therefore God?
I mean, yeah, in a sense, right? I mean, it's the only explanation because we've never observed nothing creating something. And
it's not an explanation. It's just repeatable a way of describing something you don't understand.
Hey, Stefan, how many universes have you seen created?
Okay.
Stefan, how many universes have you seen?
Well, I don't believe
created?
in a multiverse. I don't believe it. Do you believe in a multiverse?
So have you seen?
I don't know. So hold on. I've got a specific reason why I'm asking these questions. So how many universes do we know of, for sure?
We only know of this one, but in
right. So how many
sciences we think that there's multi-universe?
So if we're doing if we're talking about probability, like I kind of want to go back to the thing that you said, like if one thing was off, then life wouldn't exist. And I reject your fine-tuning claims. But there's a big problem with your arguments here in that when we're doing any kind of study, right? Like, do you understand statistical power? Does that statement mean anything to you?
It does, but you can elaborate if you like.
Okay, so let me explain a little bit. So let's say I have a six-sided die, right? And I roll it one time, and the number comes up to be 6. Yeah. And I say, well, the number is 6, and that's the only thing that can be rolled. If I roll this die, it's going to be 6 because I've only seen it be a 6. You'd probably look at me and you'd say, yep. Wait, hold on. You need to roll it more than one time in order to see what other options you're going to get. I was like, no, but I rolled it this one time and I rolled a 6. Like, so here's what happens with the universe. Like, we have one instance of all this happening, right? We have n equals 1. So can we even make any determinations about probability based on that? I'd argue no. No, we really can't. And this isn't a case necessarily where we can just re-roll the die because we have no power over just re-rolling the universe and seeing what's going to happen, right? So the most we can do at this point is say
a multiverse, which would require faith.
Well, we can hypothesize,
which would first require faith.
Stefan, no, right. We can hypothesize, but we cannot draw any conclusions because we cannot determine statistical significance. The more times you're able to roll that die, the more accurately you're able to determine probability. So my argument here is that you cannot determine probability based on the data that we're given. So these arguments of, well, this is the way the universe would be if X, Y, Z changed. Those are all hypotheses. We don't have a way to test them. We have no way to determine the actual experimental probability. Like, do you understand that there's a difference between theoretical science and experimental science?
No, I totally, yeah, I do. And that's actually
right. So we can't. So it's kind of disingenuous to say that because I disagree with this theoretical science, then this is what the experimental outcome would be, because we don't know. And that's as far as we can get. And so, like, a lot of the arguments you're making just don't really have grounds to be able to make conclusions from them.
Right. I made the conclusion, right, because of my faith. But it's like, I understand.
Right. So I don't think
minded.
you can make that conclusion. So that's the problem. You're starting with a conclusion, and
that's
instead
perfectly fine if you don't believe
right,
it.
right.
I mean,
No. So why are you starting with the
conclusion?
conclusion? Stefan, are you listening to me? Why are you starting with the conclusion instead of starting with a question? Why are you starting with the conclusion?
I already I'm a theist. I have a conclusion. You know, I have.
But why did you start?
How'd you get there?
Do you start with a conclusion for anything else in your life? Do you just assume things and then operate based on what your assumption was?
I originally thought that there wasn't a God, actually, for a very long time. I'm not going to get into my personal life.
So what convinced you?
That have happened.
So what convinced you that
I'm
that
sure
your God
on the radio station you probably don't want to hear about my testimony, but I can tell you, you know.
No, I don't necessarily want your testimony, but I want your evidence. Like, what convinced you that this is the correct conclusion?
Okay, so I'll give you the short as possible. I didn't believe in God. I had my grandfather was a street preacher, like a evangelist. No one else in my family was Christian. He gave me a Bible. He said, read it. Okay, I put it in the seat next to me on my vehicle. The day before, I said, okay, God, if you're real, just reveal yourself to me. Said a little small prayer. I didn't really believe it was going to happen. I was actually on my way back from the strip club with my brother because that's what he did on his free time. He liked to take me there. I was driving home, and the ignition light went off on my car. I pulled off to the side of the road. Car started smoking. Got out immediately. Fire all the way through the front. My entire car burned up completely. The metal was bent. That's how hot it was. Okay. Everything in my car burned, including the seat that my Bible was sitting on and my golf clubs. That's how hot it was. I went back to the vehicle after the sheriff pulled up. I grabbed my Bible, and it was the only thing that survived. It was sitting on a metal seat. I went up to the sheriff and I told him this was the only thing I could salvage. And then I asked him his name, and he said, Officer Gentile. So after that point, I had a couple things. You know, I started to think, well, this was probably a huge coincidence. But there was a lot of things that happened after that convinced me that it wasn't. So that's why I decided to turn my life over. And so me and my grandfather started having some Bible studies, and that's what changed me ultimately. So, yeah, that's the end of my story, though.
Christy,
I might have already got blocked. I'm not.
No, not at all. I mean, really, what I'm hearing you say is not at all dissimilar from what Ben was pointing out about, you know, the law of large numbers and just basic statistics. Like, I'm glad that you were safe in that situation, but it kind of feels like you said a prayer to God one time, you rolled the die, and you ended up landing on a natural 20. But that doesn't mean that every time you roll it, you're going to end up with that same result. And I would even challenge you to think back. Were there times where you kind of thought, well, maybe there is a God? Did you ever say any sort of prayer ever about, hey, God, if you're real, come and show me, or whatever else? And were those answered? I mean, when you start looking at the selection bias and everything else, it does feel really thin. And I appreciate the value and the significance of a personal story like that. I'm certainly not trying to take that away from you, but it doesn't seem like a very reasonable or rational way to gather truth.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like I said, if it was a ginormous coincidence that the officer's name was Officer Gentile and that, you know, my Bible was sitting on a metal seat, and usually I understand the process of physics and, like, you know, books burn, right? Especially if it's on a metal seat that's been burned. That just got me. I'm sorry. I was just like, God is real. Like, if I don't look at this as God telling me something, and then I started doing my own studies, and that was it. But yeah, I don't have really anything else. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, which God did you pray to?
Well, I prayed the God of the Bible. Right?
Which God of the Bible?
Because my grandfather's.
Which God of the Bible?
Jesus.
Specifically the Christian God. So I've heard similar stories from Muslims, and why should I believe your story that God was saving you, and specifically the Christian God was saving you, versus a Muslim friend that says that Allah had saved them from something similar.
Yeah. Well, technically, Muslims, and I'm not discrediting them, they do believe in the God of the Bible, or at least they subscribe to the God of the Bible and the old book. If you understand,
tell that to a Muslim.
Yeah, but they would probably disagree with you, like Christy is saying.
In the Bible.
Well, they would not agree that that Christ is God. So there's at least some distinct differences between your God and theirs, and many Muslims would disagree that you're following the same God, and in the fact that the gods, even looking at the Old Testament, are interpreted to be very different. The character of each God is very distinctly different. But even let's say if I had a Hindu friend that said that they were saved by one of their gods, why should I believe you and not them?
Well, I mean, obviously I can't answer that. I don't know. I respect Hindu culture. I don't think that God came to die to take away people's culture. One, I don't believe that he ever said anything about our culture. We still put up Christmas trees, and that's pagan, right? It's just our culture. It's what we do. So
but if somebody said
like that, what God's concerned about.
But if somebody gave a very similar story to you and said that they were convinced they weren't a Hindu, and then they became a Hindu because they believed they were saved from some accident because of this deity, would you say that their belief was correct and that's a good reason to then become a Hindu?
I mean, if someone proposed that to me, I wouldn't personally, because it wasn't my own testimony. I don't know how I'd feel. I'd probably be 50-50 as far as like what I believed, right?
But they can't, your story and their story can't both be true, right?
Sure. No, do I believe that there's forces out there and angelic beings that call themselves God, like Zeus and Thor? The Bible talks about like idol spirits.
Yeah, so you think that some people's beliefs are false. Some people's faiths are false.
I would say that the entity they believe in may be real, right? But then they create a story based on their own spirit, like Thor, which would be like wrath, right?
So how do we know?
Things like that.
So Stefan, how do we know that yours isn't one of those false ones?
Well, now we're getting into the source, right? Like we're getting right to the beginning of how, why.
No, so we're getting into evidence. I need some evidence.
Yeah.
Because like, again, people can say whatever they want. They can say that they believe in a certain thing, like, and they can say that their story is a certain way. And I'm not discounting your experience, but I question whether your interpretation of your experience is correct. Right. That's what I'm questioning. If you look at the
Old Testament, and I know you've probably read it, right? If you look at all the stories in the Old Testament, I mean, literally from Abraham sacrificing his promised son, or at least going to sacrifice his promised son, a picture of the father sacrificing his son. You have the Passover, the blood of the lamb that's put over. You have Psalms 22, which talks about, I'm poured out like water. They pierced my hands and my feet. This was written like 600 years before the act of crucifixion was even a thing.
People have been murdering each other forever. This is not exclusive to like the Old Testament or the New Testament.
Someone says they're piercing my hands and my feet. That's pretty detailed, right?
It's detailed, but people have known how to kill each other for a long time, and
it often involves piercing with sharp objects. That's and
part of it. Multiple cultures have found like the easiest ways to kill people, and the most torturous ways to kill people. I'm not convinced that like this is a good reason to say that your specific religion is the correct one because they knew how to murder people in a certain way, or like they talked about murdering people in a certain way. That's not convincing to me.
Right.
Really, Stefan, it all comes down to post hoc rationalization. Every single argument that you have made so far, whether we're talking about the fine tuning of the universe, the power of forgiveness, the beauty of trees, the safety of the Bible, I mean, everything that you've described has been, well, I saw a thing, so let me go back and try to explain that thing using this Jesus model. And I would just encourage you to think a little bit bigger, to realize that like one instance of an occurrence, one event somehow creates a narrative. You're just filling everything that you don't understand or don't like in with the word God. And yeah, that's valid. I'll let you have the last word. I haven't heard anything new or interesting other than I had an experience, and I think God is the only way that it makes sense. And I would say to you that no one else is going to be compelled by that.
Okay, I would disagree on that in a particular level. I will say this, that there's one thing that is true in the Bible, one thing, and that is that love is sacrifice. And I don't know if you have a family or not, or if you have
That's not exclusive to the Bible, though.
Right.
That's not exclusive to the Bible.
The whole point is it's not exclusive. No, I would agree with that. But it is the fundamental principle of Christianity if you really dig into the gospel and what that is, right? Sacrifice.
I mean, depending on how you interpret it and everything else, we talk to different people every week who have really different ideas of what actually is or says or does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, based on personal experience, if you live long enough, you realize that love isn't just butterflies and rainbows, right? It's sacrifice, ultimately. And so the display on the cross was just that. It was sacrifice. And God displayed the highest point of love to us because he sacrificed for us. And I think that's good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus spent a bad weekend and then went up to heaven and to live with the fathers. I don't know how much, I mean, yeah, crucifixion's like not a pleasant process by any means, but there are plenty of like humans who've been crucified and have stayed dead after that. So I don't know if Jesus really gave more than anybody else. Like, it seems like he got a pretty hefty reward for all of that. But there are plenty of normal people that are like still going to be executed and die and stay dead. And in a lot of Christians' worldview, going to hell afterwards. It seems like a lot of people are getting a worse deal than Jesus. So I don't know how much he actually sacrificed.
Right.
Certainly, he's not the only person to have ever loved or the only person to have ever sacrificed. I don't see any supernatural here. And Stefan, I don't mean to talk over you or to keep bumping into each other, but just to say, I haven't heard anything new. I haven't heard anything compelling. And I certainly wish you the best, but I would also very much ask you to lift your eyes up to the horizon a little bit, see the world a little bit more broadly, and stop looking at that single roll of the die.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I think, oh, go ahead, Stefan.
And I'm not, yeah, I mean, I'll take your advice. I respect your guys' opinion. I have no animosity. I think that you guys pose some good points. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll leave it at that. I appreciate the time, though.
Yeah, and Stefan, I'd love for you to call back in sometime. I think you are very kind caller, and none of us yelled at each other. And I think this was, while we still disagree on a lot of things, I do think this was a worthwhile discussion to have, and I would like to have more discussions with you in the future. So I hope you'd be willing to call in again sometime.
Yeah, sounds good. Will do.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your Sunday.
All right, take care. Yep, same to you.